The ending for the new Final Fantasy VII Remake has had a lot of people talking, especially regarding to the fate of Biggs and Jesse at the end. From what we can see in-game, there is evidence that suggests that Biggs at the end isn't our Biggs. Do note that these are purely my own observations and opinions. In Chapter 3, we get our first good look at the Sector 7 upper plate, as well as the surrounding Sector 6 and Sector 8 upper plates. The plate locations are evidenced in Chapter 15 later. When looking far out from the ruins of the Sector 7 plate drop, you can see that Reactor 7 is to the left and Reactor 8 is to the right. Following this pattern, Sector 6 is the plate that you can see is damaged and currently under construction. Aerith does mention this, that the damages in Chapter 8 are part of a collapsed plate, and it is important to keep in mind. No other plate you see in-game is in need of construction and to the extent of damage as Sector 6. After the collapse in Chapter 14, you can see later from Corneo's mansion that the plate to the right of the damaged plate is where Sector 7 used to be. And considering the evidence so far, that brings us to the conclusion. After the dome surrounding Midgar is broken, and the light rains down, we could see a Sector 7 undergoing restoration. This is the Sector 7 slums, and they seem to be in a much better shape than the Sector 7 slums that we know from the game. When we get the first look at the 7th Heaven sign here, it is important to note that this seems to be different than the original sign. In Chapter 13, when you first see the damaged sign, it is visibly different from the one at the post-game. The sign post-collapse has a different texture, which is easy to note, and the one from Chapter 13 is damaged both in the bottom left corner and in the upper right corner. Beyond just the texture difference and the model difference, you can see behind the Chapter 13 sign that there's a breakage point where there's visible rubble and pieces of metal behind it. This is not the same for the sign that you see in the post-game. So it is safe to say that these are two very different 7th Heaven signs. Continuing on from this scene, we have a moment where Marle sees the lights falling from the sky and she looks up towards them. As she looks up, we can see the upper plates in the area. One upper plate being a very damaged, broken down upper plate that is in need of construction, and to the right, where a Sector 7 plate should be, based on our knowledge of the Sector 6 plate, there is an upper plate there. Considering these points, it appears that in the event of this 7th Heaven sign being restored and whatever damages to the Sector 7 slums, there appears to be a Sector 7 upper plate. At least, that's what it looks like. The only difference I've noticed is that we cannot see the tower that has the computer for dropping the plate. Towards the center of Midgar, which is generally visible from anywhere you are in Sector 7s, no matter the angle that you're looking, you do not see the tower at the end of the game. If we are to assume that the Sector 7 plate was never dropped, then there should be the tower there unless something happened to the tower. Next scene that we see is a pan-up of the Sector 5 slums, going towards the orphanage and into the window. Here we see Jesse's gloves on a desk next to Biggs laying in bed. Shortly after, Biggs wakes up covered in wounds, before the scene fades to black. The next scene following that is of Marlene watering a flower in Aerith's room and seeming to react to Barrett reaching out for her from the distance. From here on out are things that occur that I don't feel is necessary to talk about regarding this specific topic. The shared thread between seeing Zack outside of Midgar, the restorations of the Sector 5 slums with the plate intact above it, and Biggs waking up is the white light that reigns over Midgar after the group had defeated the Whispers. We do not see this light any other time during the ending sequences for any of the characters. It's between the fades to black. With this, in my personal opinion, I believe that in a timeline where Zack has never died, these are all events that take place. There's still a conflict between Avalanche and Shinra, and instead of simply dropping the plate onto Sector 7, I believe that the tower gets destroyed in some form of explosion. So it's a much smaller scale of bloodshed and destruction as the original timeline where Zack has died. This being the case, I believe that this Biggs is also from this timeline, having much less injuries from a smaller scale explosion. It is worth noting that in the chapter descriptions, it does mention how a seriously injured Biggs urges Cloud to help his friends. It doesn't say any other state of what happens to Big or ever mentions him further than this. It does, however, explicitly state that they lose Jesse right before their eyes. So it is up for debate, given the context, if Biggs is dead at this point, or if it was left to be ambiguous for speculation. My personal opinion, I do believe that the Biggs that we see is from another timeline. It is from a place where we do see that the Sector 7 plate has never been dropped. There is a different 7th Heaven sign that has been destroyed, but to a different degree. And they're leaving it ambiguous for the future title. We won't know for sure about what the truth of the matter is until probably part 2, and as a longtime fan of Final Fantasy VII, playing every iteration of whatever games that came out, good and bad, I am really happy and excited for what comes next.